Do you think you know the power of a star? Get ready to witness Earth unveil something you never imagined possible. In a universe where galactic empires reign supreme and war is the only language the stars speak, a secret kept for millennia finally surfaces. Earth's first Death Star. It's not just a name, it's a promise of annihilation, a technology so advanced that it defies even the laws of physics. But wait, what do you really know about Earth? The youngest civilization in the galaxy is about to deliver the greatest shock of all time. Instead of hiding in a galaxy dominated by superior forces, humans have decided to show what they're truly capable of. They won't just fight, they will reshape the universe forever. Brace yourself, because when this star shines, there will be no more empires. There will only be Earth, and it will do what no other world has ever dared to try. But will this galactic revolution really be what they expect? Or will it be the beginning of a conflict beyond anything humanity has ever imagined?
Prepare for a cosmic journey where human power will challenge all expectations. The galaxy was on the verge of the greatest transformation in its history. The Empire, a vast and powerful military conglomerate that had oppressed countless worlds, was preparing its final fleet.
The Galactic War, which had devastated entire systems, was reaching its climax. The Loranian Federation, which had valiantly resisted, seemed to be on the brink of defeat. For years, the Empire had crushed any hope of resistance. But now, the final battle was about to begin. The Empire's flagship, immense and unstoppable, positioned itself at the heart of the fleet, like a beast ready to devour everything in its path. And yet, destruction was not the only thing approaching. Something else, something unexpected, lurked in the vastness of space. Aboard an Imperial cruiser, two figures observed the future of the galaxy with opposing perspectives. Jack, an impulsive cadet, saw this moment as the culmination of a glorious era. He believed that, with this battle, the Empire would finally secure ultimate peace for the galaxy. He was ready to take part in the last great confrontation. But his friend, Debs, was more skeptical. She felt that the Empire's victory would not bring an end to war, but rather the massacre of a final resistance. To her, this was not an act of glory, but a condemnation to an endless cycle of destruction. It was fascinating how their perspectives diverged, despite sharing the same ambition, to serve the Empire. For Jack, it was a step toward galactic order. For Debs, it was a dangerous tipping point. She believed the Empire had already conquered too much, and what came next would be an irreversible collapse. War would not bring absolute peace, only more pain and destruction. She wondered if Jack truly understood what was at stake. Would the Empire really gain the galaxy by winning, or would it only deepen its own downfall? As their thoughts clashed, a growing sense of unease spread through the cruiser. Something in the air, or rather in the void, felt different. The unshakable confidence the cadets once knew, the certainty that the Empire would never fall, was beginning to crack. They were about to take part in a historic event. But would this event be a glorious victory, or the end of an era? Debs, with her sharp instinct for reality, sensed that their destiny was about to change irreversibly. And before Jack could even suspect it, the galaxy was about to be marked by something none of them could predict. Suddenly, the red alert siren blared throughout the cruiser. It was impossible to ignore the piercing sound echoing through the corridors. Debs stood up instantly, her stomach tightening. Jack turned to her, confused. What was happening? But, before he could answer his own question, something appeared on the horizon. A brilliant light, larger than any star in the sky, began to shine in the distant void. He didn't know it yet, but that luminous point, so seemingly harmless, was the harbinger of impending chaos. Deb's words, which had once seemed like paranoid warnings, had now become prophecy. They were facing something far greater than they could ever imagine, and what was supposed to be the final glorious battle might just turn into an unexpected massacre. The Empire was about to learn a cruel lesson. Human technology, something they had never taken seriously, could very well be the key to a galactic revolution. The devastating power that was approaching wasn't from another empire. It was something different, and that difference would change everything. With the massive Imperial fleet taking position, the true battle was still yet to begin, and the galaxy, once thought to be secured by the Empire's military supremacy, was about to be changed forever. The galactic war would not end as the Empire's rulers had planned. Something new was emerging on the horizon, and the fate of the entire galaxy would be decided in the blink of an eye. The end of the Empire was closer than they had ever imagined, and the true story of human victory was about to begin. Jack was thrilled. The glow in his eyes, intensely reflected by the vastness of the Imperial fleet, was the mark of a young man who believed himself to be at the center of history. To him, there was no doubt. The galaxy was on the verge of an unquestionable victory. The Empire was about to deliver the final blow to the Loranian Federation. A galactic war that had lasted decades, turning entire systems to ashes, was reaching its climax. And in the midst of it all, Jack would be one of the protagonists of history. The final act of the war, the moment of Imperial supremacy, would not just be a political victory, but an ethical conquest. The galaxy, in his view, would finally understand the importance of strong, centralized, and unshakable leadership. After this battle, there would be no more war, only peace imposed by force. Debs, standing beside him, did not share the same excitement. She observed the Imperial formation with a shadow of skepticism, as if she could see something deeper, something darker, in what was about to unfold. She believed the Empire had already reached its peak, that what seemed like an inevitable victory was nothing more than another cycle of destruction. The enemy, she knew, had been weakened long ago. The Empire had already annihilated their combat forces, leaving only a fragmented resistance, a final hope for the Loranian nations. To her, this was not a final battle to establish peace, but a massacre. A story of empty conquests that would leave behind only the deaths of thousands more innocent civilians, the eradication of more defenseless worlds. This war no longer makes sense, Jack, she thought. But she didn't dare say it. She knew he wouldn't understand. Jack's words were sharp, convinced, filled with the imperial rhetoric he had learned all his life. Peace will come with our victory, Debs. No matter what others say, the Empire has brought stability to this galaxy. Where there was war before, now there is order. Where there was chaos, now there is peace. This is the last battle, and after it, we will own the future. He spoke as if he were certain that everything was merely waiting for the final execution. But to Debs, that future was a lie. The ethics of war could not be ignored. What was at stake was not the Empire's victory, but the total destruction of a people who had been fighting for their survival. Their discussion grew more intense. But who will pay the price for this, Jack? If the Empire wipes out the Loranians, who's to say what comes next won't be even worse? War doesn't end with the elimination of a people. It continues. Annihilation is not the solution. Jack looked at her with some disbelief. You still think the Federation has a chance, Debs? The Empire has the largest fleet in the galaxy. They're already defeated. It's only a matter of time. The frustration in Jack's voice was evident. He firmly believed that, after this final battle, the Empire would put a definitive end to the conflicts. But Deb's doubt could not be erased. With a sigh, she looked out into the vastness of space. The Imperial fleet was not just a sign of strength. It was a monstrosity. She knew that no matter how much the Empire won, it would never erase the hatred, the resentment it had sown for so long. What was happening was not a conquest, but a massacre disguised as victory. And deep down, she feared that by destroying the last Loranian resistance, the Empire was only digging its own grave. They will never forgive us, she thought. And worse, the galaxy would never forget the true nature of this war. She knew that history, as Jack saw it, would not be written by a victorious empire. The true galactic transformation would not come through imperial victory, but through human resistance, through those who survived this massacre, who endured the Empire's devastating power, and who, in the end, would take the fate of the galaxy into their own hands. Jack looked at her, still convinced of his vision of a peaceful future. But Debs could feel, with growing clarity, that what was about to happen would change not only the war, but the very way the galaxy saw the Empire, the Loranian Federation, and above all, humanity itself. Deep down, she knew the war would not end with the Empire's victory, but with the rise of something unexpected, something Jack could not yet see. And as the debate continued, in the distant reaches of space, the enemy was silently approaching, ready to shatter the Empire's arrogance. When the Empire collapsed, as Debs believed it would, the winds of change would blow forever, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Jack and Debs's conversation was abruptly interrupted by something they could never have predicted. At first it seemed like an illusion, a distant point of light on the horizon, like a star that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Debs, always alert to what was happening in the surrounding space, was the first to notice. Her eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. It was as if space itself, that vast and immeasurable void, had begun to vibrate. A massive, brilliant beam of light emerged on the horizon, eclipsing everything around it. Jack, who had been engrossed in the grandeur of the Imperial fleet, looked at the screen and frowned. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. This can't be real, he murmured. But the light only grew more intense. Debs, caught between astonishment and fear, sprang from her chair, pointing at the glowing point. "Jack, are you seeing this?" The tension in her voice was palpable. Jack glanced at her, bewildered, trying to make sense of what was happening. "What? The glorious victory of the Empire?" he said, attempting to dismiss the alarm in Debs' voice. "No, you idiot! That!" Debs nearly shouted, pointing at the screen. Something was approaching at an impossible speed, something that Imperial tracking systems couldn't even register. It was as if space itself was being torn apart. A gaping, wound in the cosmic fabric. The light kept expanding, growing more intense, like a vortex of pure energy, on the verge of consuming everything in its path. At that moment, the terrifying sound of the highest-level alert siren echoed throughout the cruiser. Red alert, enemy. Ship detected, prepare for combat. The communication system, already overloaded, was broadcasting frantic messages across the entire Imperial fleet. Every officer who had, until now, rested comfortably in their belief of invincibility was suddenly thrust into emergency mode. Jack and Debs exchanged a glance, a heavy silence lingering between them. What did this mean? What kind of ship could launch such a sudden and devastating attack? Jack, still in shock, stood up. This was impossible. The Empire was prepared for anything. Or was it? He knew the Loranian Federation was in its final moments. So who, or what, was behind this threat? Before they could process what was happening, the image on the screen expanded, revealing what appeared to be an enemy vessel of absurd proportions. It emerged like a colossal shadow, gliding through space with lethal precision, like a predator that already knew the terrain. The ship was immense, but its structure was unlike anything the Empire had ever faced. Its armor reflected a ghostly light, as if it were alive, reacting to the environment around it. It was hollow yet solid, a fusion of energy and metal. The force field surrounding the ship seemed to distort the very light around it, as if space itself was being pulled inward. The commander of the Imperial fleet, usually unshakable, was now in total despair. This isn't possible. How did they get here without being detected? Panic began to spread through the corridors, officers rushing to their stations. The sense of invincibility that had always been a core pillar of the Empire was crumbling. Fast. Jack, trying to focus, looked at Debs. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else. A feeling that, somehow, this had always been destined to happen. She sensed something he couldn't, an intuition telling her that this was no ordinary battle. They were facing something that, until now, had only been a galactic theory. The Empire was about to be challenged in a way it had never imagined. The tension escalated further as the commander of the Gloriana, the Empire's flagship, issued the first counterattack order. But what no one knew, what no tracking system had detected, was that the enemy didn't just come with overwhelming military force. There was something more, something that defied the very laws of physics, something that would shake the very foundations of galactic warfare. The Empire was about to face a threat unlike anything it had ever known. And as the Imperial fleet braced for the worst, a galactic revolution was about to unfold. The cosmic shock that followed wouldn't just mark the end of the Empire. It would signal the beginning of a new era, one where humanity, like never before, would make its final move. The calm before the storm was shattered so suddenly that Jack barely had time to process what was happening. What seemed like a simple, sudden threat turned into a galactic nightmare in a matter of seconds. The immense enemy ship, now fully visible in all its magnitude, fired. The first explosion was unlike anything the cadets had ever witnessed. It was not a simple laser beam or a conventional projectile. It was something completely new, something beyond immediate comprehension. A beam of green light, so vibrant and intense that it seemed to tear through space itself, shot toward one of the Imperial frontline battleships. The speed of the beam was impossible to track, a distortion of reality itself. Jack, staring at the screen, barely had time to scream. The shot struck directly at the heart of the ship. The explosion that followed was unprecedented. The battleship, with its immense armor, was torn in half with a violence that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The impact generated a fireball that expanded at an astonishing speed, like a supernova consuming everything in its path. The destruction was absolute. The Imperial battleship, once the pinnacle of the Empire's war engineering, was now nothing, more than a smoldering ruin. Panic-stricken screams echoed through the communicator, and what remained of the crew desperately tried in vain to transmit their final words of despair. "Please, someone hear us. We've lost most of the fleet. The Empire is being annihilated." It was impossible to grasp the scale of destruction in such a short time. Another shot, and another, each one more devastating than the last. The Empire's warships, which once believed themselves invincible, were being disintegrated like leaves in the wind. The once organized and imposing fleet was now a chaotic battlefield, where explosions and fire consumed everything in their path. What had once been a symbol of absolute power was now a graveyard of metal and blood, floating in the void of space. Jack, still in shock, could barely react. Reality was disintegrating around him. How could the Empire, so vast and indomitable, be destroyed so easily? He had been trained to believe in the invincibility of his fleet, in the Empire's unbeatable strength, but everything was collapsing in a way he could not comprehend. "This isn't possible," he murmured. He looked at Debs, who remained completely silent. She wasn't surprised. Her face, though pale, reflected a stillness that was more terrifying than any panicked scream. She knew that this was not just an attack. It was a masterstroke. The Empire had no way to handle this. With each new explosion, the Imperial fleet's communication systems became more chaotic. Order was lost, and the destruction only intensified. The commander of Gloriana, desperate, tried to organize a response. But the Empire's ships were being disabled one by one, and the cyber defense system had been breached in a coordinated attack, leaving the ships blind, unable to regroup. How did they manage to defeat us like this?" the commander of Gloriana shouted, as his own ship's control systems began to fail. But there was no more time for explanations. The devastating power of the enemy ship had already proven its effectiveness. The Empire was being destroyed, and no one seemed capable of stopping this incomprehensible force. Deb's, eyes fixed on the screen, seemed to absorb everything in silence. She knew that this was not just the end of the war. It was the end of an era. She looked at Jack, who was now in total despair. "Jack," she said, her voice calm but carrying an inescapable truth. "This was never about the war, or the Empire. This is bigger. They have something the Empire never had. The ability to destroy, to turn war into something different. The galaxy will never be the same." And as she said this, Debs felt that she wasn't just speaking about the battle unfolding before them. A revolution was being unleashed. With every shot, the Empire moved closer to its ruin. The last of the Imperial resistance was being torn apart in a spectacle of unimaginable destruction. Jack now knew that somehow the galaxy was witnessing the birth of a new power. But who would be the victor? The Empire was taking its last breath, and in space, the war was unfolding like a cataclysm of galactic proportions. Chaos consumed the Empire's ships, but it was not just physical destruction that made the tension unbearable. The war against the unknown enemy was being fought on multiple levels, and the greatest enemy now was not only the devastating power of the opposing fleet, but the very fragility of the Empire's systems. Engineers were racing against time, trying to keep the ships operational, while the enemy fleet's cyber attacks disabled the Empire's technology one by one. Every passing second felt more desperate. On one of the ships, a chief engineer shouted through the communicator as the lights flickered and control panels failed. "Can someone explain what's happening? How did we lose control of everything in an instant?" The operational systems began to fail so rapidly that even the most experienced engineers couldn't keep up. Communications, vital for fleet coordination, were practically useless. What remained was the piercing sound of alerts and alarms, the desperate cries of soldiers trying to hold the defensive lines without direction or control. On the battlefield, every Imperial ship that exploded left an even greater hole in the strategy. And as the ship started to be shut down from within, the crew members themselves began to realize the magnitude of what was happening. The defeat wouldn't just be military, it would be a complete collapse, a downfall that would leave no trace of the Empire. A collective sense of helplessness spread like a virus. Even the artificial intelligence systems, once considered unbeatable, were being hacked and corrupted in record time. Debs and Jack, now fully aware that they were in the middle of a galactic catastrophe, felt the weight of an unexpected responsibility. The fight for survival was no longer just about winning the battle. It was about escaping an imminent collapse. The Imperial fleet, long a symbol of order and power, was being torn apart from the inside by an enemy no one could fully comprehend. The ships were becoming easy targets for cyber attacks, disintegrating while the Empire watched, powerless. The sound of explosions echoed through the corridors of each vessel as the lights went out, one by one. It didn't matter how powerful the Empire's weapons were. Nothing could stop a threat that wasn't limited to the physical realm. At the heart of the Imperial fleet, the Gloriana was in a desperate situation. The commander, out of viable options, shouted at the engineers, desperately trying to keep at least a fraction of the ship operational. But with every new system failure, he knew the fall was inevitable. The older Imperial ships, those less dependent on modern digital systems, managed to hold out a little longer, but even they were beginning to succumb. The fight for survival was becoming increasingly personal. Every soldier, every cadet, knew their only chance was to try to escape the disaster. But the evacuation ships were being destroyed one by one, and the communication systems wouldn't allow anyone to organize a mass retreat. As Jack struggled to understand what was happening, he felt a growing anguish in his chest. The Empire, so vast and arrogant, was now in its final moments. But strangely, there was something more. A sense that the galaxy, once ruled under Imperial tyranny, was now undergoing a radical transformation. Civilians, who had long lived under the weight of the Empire, were now witnessing something even more terrifying: the Empire's downfall itself. Survival was no longer just about escaping the battle, but about rebuilding in a new world, where the rules would be different. It's the end, Jack thought. But when he looked at Debs, he realized she knew something more. She had been right all along. The Empire could never have remained in power. He looked at her, feeling a wave of admiration for the clarity with which she saw what was happening around them. No matter how fierce the resistance was, one thing was clear to all: the Empire wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Imperial engineering, no matter how advanced, was being undone by forces no one had foreseen. This was a technological revolution, an attack of such magnitude that the very principles of galactic warfare were being redefined in real time. The battlefield was no longer just physical, it was also cybernetic and psychological. The fight for survival was now also a fight to adapt to a new reality, one in which technology, power, and control were shifting before everyone's eyes. And no one knew for certain who, or what, would survive this transformation. Debs felt a shiver run down her spine as she watched the destruction of the Imperial ships. "We are witnessing the end of an era," she said, her tone almost reverent. "The Empire may fall, but this will make way for something greater, something more human." Jack didn't fully understand what she meant, but for the first time since the war had begun, he had the feeling that despite all the suffering, this destruction might truly be the beginning of a new phase for the galaxy. A stage where the true strength of humanity, the one never measured by the number of ships or brute force, was about to shine. The Empire was crumbling, but a galactic revolution was on the verge of emerging. In the heart of the chaos, while the Imperial fleet was being torn apart from within, an unusual transmission began interfering with communications. At first, it seemed like yet another desperate attempt by an Imperial officer trying to regain control. But soon a voice, clear and unwavering, filled the void of those frequencies, cutting through the panic-stricken messages spreading across the ships. "Attention, citizens of the Tarkasian Empire. I am Bonald Tridon, President of the Federation, and I am human." The impact of these words was immediate. Every officer who heard the transmission fell silent, as if they had taken a direct hit. Humans. The Empire, with its decades of galactic dominance, had never considered humans a threat. They were seen as a primitive race with insignificant military power, an unremarkable species in the intricate network of advanced civilizations across the galaxy. How could someone from the Loranian Federation, supposedly a force already defeated, lead an offensive of such magnitude? And even more baffling, how could they suddenly be so powerful? Jack and Debs exchanged glances, disbelief spreading across their faces. This was not just a battle. It was a historic turning point. Bonald Tridon, speaking with that relentless confidence, seemed more like a master strategist than a mere political leader. He had demonstrated a deep understanding of war, not just in commanding armies but in manipulating the very minds of his enemies. For Jack, who had always believed in the Empire's supremacy, the fact that a human was speaking in such a manner was an insult. But there was something else. The tone of Tridon's voice carried a certainty that only true victors possessed. It was the calmness of someone who knew that fate was in their hands. He wasn't merely announcing a victory, he was declaring the end of an era. Then, the Federation president revealed something even more shocking. He wasn't just addressing the Empire, but a greater truth. Your Empire has destroyed entire civilizations, turned fertile planets into desolation, and now you celebrate the extermination of a defenseless race. That ends today. The words resonated like a sentinel of destruction, a double-edged sword cutting through the Empire's arrogance. Soldiers, cadets, and officers who heard them no longer knew what to think. How could humans, a species they believed to be on the margins of history, rise against the Empire and make such a declaration? Debs, upon hearing Bonald Tridon's words, found herself in a state of reflective perplexity. She had already sensed that there was something different about this conflict. But now, it seemed that the Empire was facing not just a political revolution, but a revolution of values. Humans, once considered an inferior species, now stood before the greatest military power in the galaxy, challenging the very foundations of galactic warfare with an unthinkable strategy. "We always thought we were the masters of the universe, but they have something we never understood, Jack. They have the ability to rewrite the rules." Deb spoke in a low voice, as if the magnitude of what was happening was still settling within her. Jack, on the other hand, felt a growing anger. How could humans, with their history of defeat and marginalization, be capable of bringing the Empire to its knees so decisively? He felt the weight of defeat like a physical blow, and a wave of shame coursed through his veins. He had been taught to believe in the Empire's invincibility, in its absolute superiority, but now everything seemed like an illusion. The Empire was being swept from the galaxy like a sinking ship in turbulent waters. Bonald Tridon was right. What was happening was the end of the Empire, and this end was not an imperial victory, but a radical transformation of the entire galaxy. "But what does this mean for us, Debs?" Jack asked, his voice almost lifeless. The war, which had once seemed to have a clear outcome, was now immersed in a complexity he could no longer comprehend. Debs, who had already anticipated that nothing would ever be the same, responded with an unsettling calm. "It means the Empire was not what we thought. And it means that humans, as improbable as they may be, now have the power to rewrite history." "It's no longer about the battle itself, Jack. It's about the transformation that's happening, and what comes after it." As Bonald Tridon's transmission ended, an unsettling silence filled the room where Jack and Debs stood. The Empire's power was collapsing, and the galaxy, once submissive, was now on the brink of a new era. But what exactly did this new era mean? The Empire, which had risen as the dominant force in the galaxy, was about to be replaced by a new order, an order where humans, once considered insignificant, now stood at center stage. But what would this revolution look like? The fall of the Empire was only beginning, and the real battle for survival was about to unfold. It was a vision that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. The destruction of the Tarkazian Empire. A galactic power that had lasted for centuries seemed to be happening in real time. What the citizens of the Empire's capital watched, without fully understanding what was happening, was the sun of their homeworld slowly disappearing beyond the horizon. People stopped in their homes, in the streets, and in buildings, their eyes fixed on the sky as darkness began to swallow everything. It was as if the universe itself had decided to take revenge on a tyranny that had lasted for too long. "Why is the sun disappearing?" a child asked, eyes wide with fear. The father, watching in silence, had no answer. The destruction of the Empire was not just physical. It was being felt on a psychological, emotional, and even spiritual level. The galaxy, which had always seen the Empire as an unshakable force of control, was now being shaken to its very foundations. The loss of the sun, that vital star, was more than just a cosmic catastrophe. It was the symbol of the death of an entire empire, and no one was truly prepared for it. But at the same time, there was a strange sense that something new was emerging, something greater. The capital's defense systems were failing one by one. What at first seemed like a localized collapse quickly turned into something far greater. The Empire, which believed it had dominated the galaxy with its mighty fleet and unbeatable ships, was being swallowed by a force it could not fight. The destruction was no longer just physical. It was a moral destruction, an annihilation of everything the Empire represented. The Empire's former glories were crumbling like a house of cards, and what remained was the harsh reality. The cycle of oppression and war was finally coming to an end. But in doing so, it was making way for a galactic revolution. In every corner, on every planet of the Empire, reactions were mixed. Despair, disbelief, but also a kind of liberation. The imperial citizens, who had been forced to live under a silent tyranny, now felt a breeze of hope. The Empire, the force once seen as unbeatable, was collapsing before everyone's eyes. This was not just a human victory. It was the end of a cycle of destruction that had lasted for generations, and the galaxy, though still in shock, was beginning to glimpse the possibility of a future without the shadow of an oppressive galactic empire. Debs, who had already seen the Empire falling apart in an endless war, now watched reality transform before his eyes. The Loranian Federation had demonstrated not only an incredible military capability, but also a deep understanding of war as a game of cosmic chess. The human superweapon, that devastating power that had once seemed impossible to attain, had been used with surgical precision. It was not brute force that defeated the Empire, but an unforeseen tactical intelligence. Intergalactic war now had a new language, and the humans had just shown the universe how to play this game. "So this is it. The Empire won't exist anymore," Jack murmured, his gaze lost in the void as the last explosions shook the capital's ground. He had imagined this moment before, but never like this. He had always thought the Empire would win. He had always believed imperial supremacy was an unquestionable fact. But now he knew, in a painful and difficult way, that the Empire was dead. There was no turning back. No more glory. Only darkness, and with it, a change of galactic proportions. But the most interesting, the most paradoxical thing was what would come next. The Empire's defeat did not mean a simple victory. The entire galaxy now stood before a new order, a galactic revolution yet to take shape. The destruction of the Empire would not bring peaceful tranquility, but an even fiercer struggle for survival and a new balance of power. Humans, now revealed as the true force capable of altering the fate of the galaxy, found themselves in a role they had never even anticipated. The fall of the Tarkasian Empire was not the end of an era. It was the beginning of another. And no one, not even Bonald Tridon, knew exactly where this new era would lead. The Empire, in its vanity, had never seen what was coming. It believed itself invincible, unbreakable. But the humans had just taught the galaxy a lesson in power that could not be ignored. The end of the Empire was, in fact, the end of an era of galactic oppression. But in its destruction, something new would emerge. What would it be? A galaxy at war? A new order? Or perhaps a reconstruction where humanity's true power would finally shine? Only time would tell. What remained for Jack and Debs now was to figure out what to do the day after the fall of an empire. Were they ready for this new era? Only the future, that unexpected, unpredictable future, could reveal the answer. So, are you ready to see how it all unfolds? Earth's first death. Star is not just a superweapon. It's the symbol of a new era, a galactic revolution where humans are finally in charge. But before anything else, we have one question for you. What will be the price of victory? What happens when you break the rules of the game and completely shift the balance of power? Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. Curious? To see what happens next? Then don't miss the next video. Click now and subscribe to be part of this epic story. Turn on notifications and get ready for another intergalactic journey. Don't let the future of the galaxy wait. Join this revolution and discover what humans are truly capable of conquering.